Hello and welcome to Your Ghana, My Ghana. My name is Dede Amanor-Wilks. Today we're looking at the meaning of Africa Day. Should we still celebrate it? My guest in the studio is Michael Kottoh, Afro-Champions optimist and managing partner at Konfidants. Michael, thank you for being with us in the studio today.
Thank you very much, Dede. It's my pleasure to join you.
Great. Before we begin our conversation, let's take a quick look at some of the key issues we'll be discussing. Africa Day commemorates the formation of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, now the African Union, on May 25, 1963. The OAU aimed to promote unity, solidarity, and cooperation among African states for decolonization, development, and an end to apartheid. The founding members included leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Jomo Kenyatta, Kenneth Kaunda, and Haile Selassie, who became its first chair. Today, the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfTA, aims to achieve economic integration among African states. The agreement has protocols on trade, investment, intellectual property rights, competition policy, digital trade, women and youth in trade, and it identifies goods for liberalized market access. However, despite the initial enthusiasm, little meaningful trade has occurred under AfTA, and sector linkages are yet to be created. Small-scale manufacturers in Ghana, for example, have faced difficulties exporting through AfTA due to logistical challenges and an unresponsive secretariat. The rules of origin also pose a challenge, as they require a level of local content that can be difficult to achieve. Despite these challenges, Afro-Champions optimist Michael Kottoh believes that Africa Day is still worth celebrating, as it reminds us of our shared struggle and the great possibilities for Africa. He notes that AfTA is a huge leap forward despite the slowdown since the initial period of euphoria. He says the process needed to be slowed down to get the details right and ensure that countries are not rushed into implementation. Kottoh emphasizes the need for industry leaders to take ownership of the AfTA process and influence governments to meet their needs. With this, AfTA can still achieve its promise of creating a market of 1.4 billion people with a combined African GDP of $3 trillion a year, making it the biggest free trade area in the world. Africa Day commemorates the formation of the Organization of African Union, the OAU, now the African Union, on the 25th of May, 1963. What is the significance of that day for you?
Well, Dede, as an African, and as an African who has had the good fortune of growing up in what would possibly be called more peaceful times in the history of the continent. I think I look back with a lot of nostalgia on the golden days of African liberation. And whenever I have read many of those histories, whether it's Kwame Nkrumah or the Mau Mau movement in Kenya or the latter day struggles in South Africa, there's just one thing that runs through all these stories, which is that we're one people. We're one people. If you look back on our pre-colonial history, the days of the glorious African empires of old, whether it's the Mali Empire, the Songhai Empire, or any of the many empires that gave birth.
The Ghana Empire.
The Ghana Empire, the Ashanti Empire. All of these empires tell us a story of a continent that flourished in terms of intra-African trade. We were trading. Of course, there were wars of conquest and all of that, right? But ultimately, there is evidence that, for centuries, as a people, we traded amongst one another. We were unified by many, many, many common bonds before colonialism. And the post-colonial struggle has been defined by a sense of mission by the founding fathers, of the African Union, the Organization of African Unity, and now the African Union, by a singular mission to make sure that Africa is eventually united. And there's no doubt that every year when we have to observe Africa Day, that we are reminded, that this common struggle that unites us is one that's, guided by this mission, that this continent, in one way or another, has to come together. And as a people, we're stronger when we're united. And we can become more relevant on the world stage. It's a lot easier for us to emerge as an economic powerhouse. We have so much potential as a people. The main reason why we're not able to fulfill this African potential is because we are disunited on the economic front. Many small fragmented economies. If you put Africa together as one big economy, with a GDP of over $3 trillion, that effectively puts us in the 10 biggest economies in the world, right? But disunited as we are, not a single African country can even be a member of the G20, right? So everything points to the fact that as a people, we need to come together. And I think that the celebration, the observance of African Day, if for nothing at all, reminds us about this. Because it's very easy to forget, every day, every country, we're all sort of toiling in our struggles. But at least once a year, right? There's something that reminds us that we're one people.
And in terms of what you say, that Africa has the potential to produce a potential 3 trillion a year in GDP.
Yes.
The great hope now in achieving that kind of economic integration is through the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfTA, right? 5 years ago, there was so much excitement.
Yes.
There were a lot of meetings. I used to see you in all of those meetings with your, can I call him your partner in crime, David Ofosu-Dorte.
Yes.
I used to see you in all the meetings, and there was so much buzz about the AfTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, as country after country lined up to first sign and then ratify the agreement. But now there seems to be a great slowdown, and some critics argue that very little trade has been achieved under the AfTA. What's your take on that?
Well, there was a lot of euphoria, no doubt, 5 years ago when 44 presidents and heads of states signed, the AfTA agreement. And I happened to be in the room that day in Kigali when the 44 heads of states signed the agreement.
Kigali, Rwanda is where the agreement was signed.
Yes, and I happened to be in the room when it was signed. And I was struck by just the sheer number of people who were shedding tears. People were emotional.
Presidents.
Just the delegates, when the presidents were signing. It was a remarkable moment. It was one of the most profound moments of my life. So there was a lot of expectations. There were high expectations that if you could get 44 out of the 54 governments to sign the agreement, then you could move very fast.
And that happened within a year, wasn't it?
It happened within a year. So by 2019, we had the minimum number of countries that needed to ratify the agreement in order for it to come into force had ratified, which in the history of free trade agreements was unprecedented. Now, this is 54 countries we're talking about. There is no free trade agreement anywhere in the world, if you take all the other regions, that comprises so many countries. So the AfCFTA is the largest free trade agreement in the world by number of countries. And to have been able to move that whole process very forward, that very quickly was profound. So there was a lot of expectation. But I think 5 years down the line, a lot of people look back and say, well, it looks like the momentum has died down. We're not, a lot of business people are asking, where is the trade? If I want to trade under AFCFTA, where do I start? A lot of people ask questions, business people ask questions. It looks like nothing has happened. The truth is a lot has happened.
Tell us
over the last 5 years. A lot has happened. A lot has happened because after the signing, you needed the countries to ratify for it to come into force. And then the countries now have to go into negotiations. And the negotiations are a very, very tedious, very detailed, legalistic process. If you have 54 countries, and each one of them has to come in and negotiate the products that they want to trade, the service lines that they want to trade, and then negotiate the tariff lines. Mind you that the AFCFTA has multiple protocols, and each of them have to be negotiated. You have a protocol on goods, protocol on services, protocol on competition policy, protocol on intellectual property rights, there's a protocol on digital trade, there's a protocol on women and youth, there's a protocol on dispute settlement. All of this, each one of these has to be negotiated. And it's not 10 countries, it's not 20 countries, it's 54 countries.
And negotiated to be the same in each of those 54 countries?
Yes, because there's certain common targets that all the countries have to agree on. But the agreement also provides for some flexibility for countries. So the objective is that 90% of all the products that are traded in the continent will be traded eventually under zero tariffs, eventually.
90%, not 100%.
Not 100%, eventually
under
90%
zero tariffs.
under zero
and the
tariffs.
other 10%?
Over a period of time, not immediately. Now, the other 10%, countries have some flexibility to decide that some products are so sensitive that they want to exclude those completely. And then there's another category of products that countries can say, yes, these are sensitive, but we want to face the implementation over a period of time. And there are also some flexibility for low-income countries versus mid-income countries, right? So the poorer countries in the continent also have some flexibility to face the implementation processes.
Is it that they have a longer time
to
phase out?
right? To phase out.
And what are those
countries.
sensitive products?
Well, it is up to countries to decide. So that flexibility is provided for countries to decide that, well, in these product categories, we think that it's either so sensitive to our national revenue earnings, or it's so sensitive in terms of employment. We have an over-concentration of our people in these sectors, and therefore, if we phase down the tariffs and open up, access to those sectors instantly, and we're not prepared, we think that there'll be some shocks that we might not be able to adjust to. So, and all of this.
Some products are protected, are they? Special products like kente, isn't kente protected under?
No, under textiles. I mean, I can't talk, to specifics of kente, but textiles are among the products that are traded. There should be no reason why kente should be protected, because you want to trade kente across the continent. You want Africans to be able to get access to kente if they want to buy kente or any other local fabric. Right. So it's really at the discretion of countries based on their own national circumstances to on the basis of evidence, and they have to submit evidence as part of the negotiation process. It's not just a country showing up and saying that I just don't want to trade this product, but you have to show evidence that there will be undue shocks, adverse shocks to either my national, either my revenues or my taxes, or or to employment if I open up immediate access to these markets, and therefore I want to make the case to be allowed to face, the gradual opening up of certain sectors, in my economy. That the idea is that if a country gets this granted, then they will, over that period of time, take measures that will prepare the country, that will prepare the particular sector to be able to now open up to trading, with the rest of the continent. So You don't just say, okay, you have 13 years to open up a particular sector, and then you just sit back for 13 years, and 13 years comes and you have to undertake measures.
Gradually,
so gradually.
progressively.
Exactly. So certain, the AFCFTA Secretariat, I am aware, has worked closely with some stakeholders to put certain measures in place. So, for example, the Afro-Exim Bank, in partnership with the AFTA Secretariat, is rolling out what they call the AFCFTA Adjustment Fund. Now, that is a fund that is being established to enable countries that have or countries that anticipate that there will be certain shocks, certain adverse economic shocks to certain sectors of their economy as a result of opening up trade and after, to access the fund to build capacity either of workers in those sectors to adjust to the changes that will happen, or to build up capacity of their businesses, SMEs, to be able to be more competitive. Or if it is tariff, shocks to revenue, to be able to access the fund to provide some temporary adjustments to, say, if there are major losses in revenue, tax revenues or import duties, right? They can use some of those funds, to temporarily adjust, whilst they build capacity. So these are examples of initiatives that are being undertaken to help countries that are less competitive and which anticipate that they could suffer some shocks, to adjust, just basically to adjustment mechanisms. So as we speak, most of the tariff lines have been negotiated. Over 80% of all the products that have been earmarked to be traded under AFTA have had their tariff lines negotiated.
Can you explain what you mean by the tariff lines?
So every country has to submit what is called the Schedule of Tariff Concessions as part of the negotiation process. So if use the example of Kente, there's Kente, we use the example of Ghana, maybe there's Kente, there's chocolate, there's some, cosmetic products. When Ghana goes for negotiations, Ghana is expected to submit a schedule of tariff concessions. That means that for the list of products that Ghana is willing to trade under AFTA, Ghana has to submit how much tariff it is willing to reduce by. And of course, there are benchmarks, right, under the agreement. But every country is expected to submit its own, list of what they call the schedule of tariff concessions. It comprises many things. It comprises just what a tariff that you're willing, right, to agree to under the broad framework of the agreement. It also includes how you want to face the implementation of the tariff over a period of time. So it's those two things primarily, and then all the countries come together. The idea is that there has to be harmonization amongst all the multiple countries that are negotiating, so that there are some common harmonized tariff lines. That whole process of making sure that if Nigeria wants to charge X% on a particular product and Ghana wants to charge Y% on a particular product, how we make sure that we negotiate the process so that there's harmonization and everybody is charging a common tariff line is a very, very long, drawn-out process. And, we have the regional economic blocks. There's ECOWAS, there's SADC, there's EAC. Many of these regional economic communities are also free trade areas on their own. Which means that they have their own negotiated tariff lines for their. So ECOWAS has negotiated a lot of tariff lines already for certain products.
So that makes it easier. That actually speeds up the AFTA
process. So part of what they did was that instead of all ECOWAS countries going to negotiate individually, one way that the process was accelerated was that, okay, ECOWAS countries should try and agree and submit common tariff lines for negotiation as a block. And that also helped to make sure that the tariff lines that are being negotiated align with the tariff lines that already exist within, say, ECOWAS or within, say, SADC, right? So that was a process, and you had to go product by product, and it was a very, very long, drawn-out process. So that's one of the reasons why the process slowed down. But it was a necessary slowdown, because what you don't want is down the line some countries saying that we were rushed through the process and we never really had the time to really completely negotiate. So there's been a slowdown, but you cannot not have a slowdown if you have 54 countries negotiating a trade treaty.
And not all of them have ratified.
Not
there are
all of them.
about 8, are there not, that haven't ratified?
About 47 now have ratified.
Why
as of now.
the ones who haven't ratified, what is holding them back?
I mean, it's a national decision. The ratification is something that happens at a parliamentary level for most countries. So internally, countries have to consult with industry, they have to consult with labor, they have to consult with political interest groups, and they have to align with their national strategies. And if there's no national consensus, and it is not possible to get a parliament to ratify, then you cannot go, and deposit your instrument of ratification and then continue with the rest of the process. I still think that 47 having ratified now is an incredible achievement. And I think that the rest should be given the time it takes to complete the process, and join it as and when they want to. If you look at many trade agreements, there's always, even the European Union, that
not everybody
joined. It takes time.
Michael, can we look at the challenges facing small manufacturers? Some here in Ghana are complaining that the AFTA Secretariat is not responsive to their needs. There are some challenges, and I remember even 5 years ago, some of the sticking points. One of the biggest issues was about the rules of origin. Can you explain to our listeners, our viewers, what are the rules of origin and why does that pose difficulties for small manufacturers? I can give an example of chocolate manufacturers who have to import. So somebody who uses 70% cocoa, Ghana cocoa, in her chocolate bar says she still needs to import 10% milk from Europe because there's only one country in Africa that produces the type of milk powder that chocolate needs. As a smooth one, not the regular bumpy one. Can you tell us more about the rules of origin? Why this is such a sticky issue, and why it's also very important for Africa to have
the rules of origin. So, the rules of origin simply say that if this is an African free trade area, the products that are traded should be African-made products.
And what's the definition of African-made?
The definition of African-made products is where the rules of origin comes in, which is that the product must be certified to have originated from a member country of the African.
100%.
Not 100%.
Okay.
Because there's no product that is 100% made in any country in the world. So the agreement recognizes that every product necessarily requires some foreign inputs, right? And the question then is, where do you place that threshold of African inputs versus non-African inputs? That's where the question comes in. The rules of origin have been negotiated for a majority of the products under the AFTA, and they have been negotiated product by product. This is over 3,000 product categories. The reason this is important is because for Africa, this agreement is not just a free trade agreement. It is a cornerstone of the continent's aspiration to industrialize and to do more value addition and to move up the global value chain. It is extremely important to recognize this aspect of the African Free Trade Area because it is called a free trade agreement, so the perception might be that it's just for trading. It is supposed to be a catalyst to jumpstart, to accelerate Africa's industrialization. The connection between the rules of origin and the continent's industrialization is this. If we don't have the rules of origin, what it means is that Chinese products could easily be traded under the AFTA. As of now, you cannot import products from China and trade them under the AFCFTA. You can still bring products from China and trade in Africa if you want to ship them in Africa, but you pay the tariffs. You cannot trade them tariff-free or under the reduced tariffs or some of the other market access opportunities that exist under the AFCFTA. So,
and I think these were some of the fears that countries like South Africa, Nigeria had at the beginning.
Yes, they had it at the beginning.
They were slow to ratify because they feared that we could be inundated by goods from Europe, America, more advanced economies.
Yes, but the thing with the likes of Nigeria is that they are also scared about being inundated with goods from fellow African countries, right? Because there's a lot of market barriers and all of that. So the rules of origin require that before you can ship a product, if you're a manufacturer, if you're a small manufacturer, you need to show evidence that you have met the threshold for African inputs that were used or that are required to be used to manufacture a particular. So to get practical, let's say chocolate, because you mentioned the example of chocolate and the cocoa and the milk and all of that.
For chocolate?
I can't tell what a specific threshold is, but there is a threshold that's normally anywhere between 25% and 60% or 70%, depending on the product.
Oh, it could be as low as 25%?
Yeah, it could be as low as 25% for certain, because everything has to be really evidence-based. It is the case that there are certain products that we know that currently in Africa, it's almost impossible to manufacture any of the inputs. So most manufacturers will necessarily have to import a majority of the inputs. Now, if you put a threshold that is, say, 50%, and current evidence from industry shows that nobody is currently manufacturing at that level, then the rules of origin just becomes an abstraction. So what we need is a strategy that, again, graduates the rule of origin progressively over time and increases it gradually in line with the capacity to produce more inputs locally in Africa. In order for it to be realistic and to have the effect that you want. So you don't impose 90% rules of origin as a blanket rules of origin when you know that the evidence shows that majority of producers in the continent cannot even produce. In fact, there are no manufacturers of certain raw materials, of certain inputs. So it's all a very scientific process. And this is one of the opportunities that manufacturers should actually take advantage of, right? Because it means that we can do more local manufacturing. We need to source more inputs locally. So the milk example that you talk about, for example, it's an opportunity for which other African country,
like Kenya,
or Kenya, or any of the Sahel countries that produce that kind of milk. This is an opportunity for them, right, to all of a sudden scale up production of that critical input and start shipping it under the AFCFTA, to places like Ghana and
except that it's not the fresh milk they want. They need it to be dried. So to now move to processing,
we now need to process
milk.
the fresh milk, and and that's all value addition, and it can be done right here in the continent. So that's where investors come in. For example, some importers that used to import that from, say, Europe could realize all of a sudden that it's actually more expensive, to import that into the continent, because you have to pay more tariffs than if somebody was producing it locally and could sell it, tariff-free. It's an incentive for those importers or whoever is producing that in Europe to consider setting up a production facility in the continent. Then that creates jobs locally. Then that provides new business for cattle producers, and all of that. So it's a way of growing the value chain. And the rules of origin is the one centerpiece of the AFCFTA that we need to pay a lot of attention to. Because it is one of the greatest opportunities we have now to industrialize the continent. But the industrialization, the rules of origin are not enough to trigger the industrialization if other factors for successful industrialization do not exist.
Like vision, government will, political will.
Exactly. And other things like the cost of power.
The
cost of power is a very, very critical input in industrialization. And not just the cost of power, but reliable, stable, cheap power is one of the challenges we have in the continent.
Yeah.
Infrastructure.
So we're getting into the area of logistical issues,
right?
now. Right.
You mentioned, governance, the right, macroeconomic and operating environment, taxes, right? And then skilled labor. These are all inputs into the manufacturing and industrial process. And you can have the best rules of origin, but if these important fundamentals are not there, it's not possible to have the industrial revolution we need. But the rules of origin is an important, element. And we should make sure that it's well designed, to be able to play its role.
So there can be a stimulus.
It can be a stimulus.
For industrialization.
Exactly.
Great. That's a great point. And then the other issue that affects the small manufacturers, the question of certification between different standards boards. Like, for instance, if Ghana FDA approves something and then Nigeria says you have to get a different certificate for them, this is very cumbersome. What's your understanding of that?
Yes. And the issue is with certification is that, under free trade agreements, one of the challenges is what you call the non-tariff, barriers. Because you've got tariff barriers to trade, then you've got non-tariff barriers to trade. Countries come together and sign a free trade agreement and they say, oh, we agree to scrap the tariffs. We are pro-free trade, we support this. And then they turn around and use other means to still obstruct trade.
Like, for a good example is child labor.
Child labor is one, they will have, like Europeans use that a lot on Africans, right?
Right.
But
like in the cocoa sector.
Yes, but standards become one of the most commonly used non-tariff barriers because your product gets to the border and they say, produce the certification. And they say, oh, well, we have a different standard for certification for the products than you have, in your country. So we don't recognize the certification that, say, the Food and Drugs Authority of Kenya has issued for a particular, tea product that you want to import because it's different from what the FDA of Ghana requires.
Right.
So harmonizing standards is a very, very important.
Can it be done?
It can be done.
It can be done.
And it must be done. It must be done. Because if we don't do it, then all the hard work that has gone into, negotiating new tariff lines and bringing down the tariffs and, all these protocols will not yield, the objective. So it must be done.
But if it hasn't been done at the level of ECOWAS, if there's a problem between Ghana and Nigeria over standards, how can it be done continentally?
Well, it can still be done.
But why hasn't it been done in ECOWAS?
Well, I mean, it comes down again to political will. Right? It comes down to political will. Absolutely. Yes. I mean, the countries have to be willing to enforce and implement, and they don't do it. One of the advantages of the AFTA is that we've got a dispute resolution mechanism under the AFTA, which ECOWAS, for example, doesn't have.
Is that so?
Yes. So if Nigeria decides to block the borders like they do every now and then, the other ECOWAS countries have no means of redress. With the exception of political dialogue. But under AFTA, a dispute resolution mechanism exists, which means that a country can take another country to court under AFTA and obtain a ruling under the mechanism and have that enforced. So that is a differentiation. It's an important differentiating factor that hopefully should make it a lot harder for countries to obstruct each other using things like non-tariff barriers. I am not sure how the enforcement will happen though, because even under the WTO, it's not been very easy to enforce rulings. In fact, it got to a point under the WTO arrangement where even the appellate arrangements came to a standstill because, it's just not being able to convene. And if they issue rulings, sometimes enforcement is a problem. So, but at least we have a dispute resolution mechanism, which is very important.
In as much as the regional economic groupings can be building blocks towards creating AFTA,
yes.
AFTA has the final say.
AFTA has the final say. That alignment between the regional blocks and AFTA is been a conversation that's still work in the process, but AFTA is supposed to override everything, which is why the negotiations had to involve the regional economic communities.
Okay.
So for small manufacturers, back to your question, we need to make sure that they understand the rules of origin and they're able to take advantage of it. And that involves a lot of things. If the rules of origin thresholds are too high, it's important that small manufacturers are part of the negotiation process to see how they can be reduced a bit. Or if they are too low, then it's important that small manufacturers are a part of that dialogue, to make sure that the thresholds are at a level that enable them to be able to meaningfully take advantage of the rules of origin. But the rules of origin are important. For a lot of small producers, yes, they have to import certain, inputs. They have to import a lot of inputs and all of that. But it's not just the importation of the inputs. The way rules of origin, it tries to put there's a formula that is used to calculate local value added. So it's not just like tangible material inputs. It's also the labor that goes into producing the goods. It's, say, the cost of utility, power that goes into producing the goods, right? All the local value added in that sense, when you put all the factors of production that go into producing the product, you're able to quantify all of those and add them as, part of your calculating whether you're meeting the rules of origin or not. But yes, the material inputs constitute a very important part of it. And all of that, creates opportunities for growing value chains, because if you take industrialization, for example, we need a lot of agricultural inputs. So you have a rules of origin. It means that we need to source, from the agricultural sector. So there's an opportunity for the agricultural sector to then, feed industries, because industries are required to source from them. It also creates opportunities for other manufacturers to start producing, raw materials locally rather than import them. Ghana, for example, we did some research at Konfidants a few years ago, about 4 years ago. We're trying to look at Ghana's competitiveness under AFTA. And we benchmarked Ghana to certain countries in Africa that the research showed to be very competitive in their exports and production and exports of certain products that Ghana has, comparative advantage in producing. And when we looked at all the metrics to see Ghana's competitiveness, one of the weakest areas for Ghana was over-dependence on imported inputs for production. When we took the top 10 most competitive countries in Africa, and when we benchmarked Ghana to them, Ghana was the country that was the most dependent on the importation of foreign inputs.
And that high import dependency explains the volatility of the Ghana cedi, surely.
Exactly.
Does it? It does. Right.
Exactly, it does. So we've had this challenge for a long time, and we need to do something about it. Otherwise, we'll not be able to take full advantage of, things like the rules of origin.
Right. So if AFTA can provide, if the rules of origin can provide that stimulus, we're much better off. Then, although it seems like nothing much has been happening, we've come to slow down. One initiative that I find very interesting under AFTA in the last few years was the guided trade initiative.
Yes.
Was it just for a year? Can you tell it? There was a pilot project.
It was a pilot.
To test the readiness of countries to trade among themselves.
Yes.
Tell us a little, what were the lessons from it?
Oh, I think it was a very, very good initiative, because everybody was asking, when are we going to start trading? Are we going to wait for all the countries to finish the negotiations? So the Secretariat...
Secretariat here in Accra.
In Accra, decided to initiate this guided trade initiative, which was basically a pilot trade.
How many countries?
Initially was 7 countries that came together, including Ghana, to say we will do this initial trade and show a proof of concept, that it is actually possible to do actual meaningful trade under AFTA. So Ghana, for example, imported tea and coffee from Kenya and other countries, and then Ghana exported, ceramic products and some cosmetic products to other countries, right? That was a very good initiative in, I think, 2022. And now you have about 31 countries that have, been included in the guided trade initiative. So it is actually,
it's still ongoing.
It is actually technically still ongoing.
Ongoing,
it's
and
still
it's
technically
expanding.
ongoing. It's expanding.
Wow.
And there have been a lot of lessons, from this. I mean, of course, it showed first and foremost that yes, there's proof of concept. You can actually, because what happens is that for the trade to actually happen, there's all these administrative documentation that needs to be developed, right? At the customs, the shipping, the compliance. These are the tangibles, of the after. If I want to ship, some ceramic product from Ghana to another African country, first of all, I need to know what the tariff, the tariffs that apply on that particular type of ceramic product. If I want to ship it to Nigeria or want to ship it to Ethiopia, I need to know how much Ethiopia negotiated to charge on that ceramic product. First of all, I need to know that as an exporter. And then I need to apply for my certificate of origin, which shows that the inputs that went into producing that ceramic product meets the requirements for locally and African-made, components. And then I need to have that certified, right? And then I need to now, file all my exports, documentation and go through, get a clearance, do the shipping. And when it gets to Kenya, or if it gets to Ethiopia, the authorities there must recognize that this product is coming to their country under AFTA and not under anything else, so that they don't charge, the duties that they are not supposed to charge, because that could very well happen. The product gets to the other country, and the other country says, well, we are not ready to implement AFTA, so you have to pay the duties. So Ghana has issued a certificate of origin, but Ethiopia doesn't recognize that certificate when it gets to Ethiopia. You want to avoid all of those. So there's a lot of documentation, right, that needs to happen. And it was important to test that whole process, right, end to end. And for customs and compliance authorities in the various participating countries to also just have a feel of going through the processes. Actually, I have stamped, and given a stamp of approval for a product to enter the country under AFTA. It is actually real. And so they needed to do all of that.
Okay.
And so the participating countries did that. And they also needed to test how long it took to clear the product, how long it took for the customs and, compliance officials to actually, finish the process of clearing a particular product. All of that needed to be tested. So it was done. Some of the lessons that emerged, one, for example, was that some exporters, some businesses that took advantage of the guided trade initiative did not have enough information about, say, the tariffs that applied to the products that they wanted to export into particular countries. So it revealed that there needed to be more information sharing, to businesses. I think there were also some undue delays in issuing the rules of origin certification for the rules of origin. And that was because a lot of customs officials were doing this for the first time. They needed to familiarize themselves with a new set of information, so the tariff lines that apply, the rules of origin that apply, the thresholds, and to be able to, do all the checks and issue the certification. So there were some delays, but all of that was a good, experience. And the Secretariat has been working with the lessons, to make sure that, they share it with countries and that they are able to work with the lessons to see how we can speed things up. The challenge, though, is that we seem to be stuck in the guided trade, right? We need to move.
Because it's comfortable, or it's cozier, or it's easier.
Well, it's not really. It's because it's still a pilot mentality.
Right.
You know how that works, right? We're piloting. So, yeah,
so
we
it
tested it.
doesn't matter if things go wrong because it's just a test.
Yeah, it's just a pilot. When we get to the real trade, it will happen.
Yeah.
So I personally don't understand why we've got 31 countries joining the guided trade initiative. Scrap it, in my opinion.
And start.
If you have 31 countries, that's a majority of countries. So it's do the real trading.
Right.
You agree?
Absolutely.
And you talked about small manufacturers earlier on. I feel that one of the things we could do to speed up trading again is to allow for small businesses and even large businesses to trade without rules of origin for a limited period of time.
To get them started.
Just to get them started. Now, there are going to be a lot of loopholes if you do that. And you're going to have a lot of products that are not completely compliant, with the requirements of the rules of origin trading in the country. I don't think that should be a problem. I think that what we need now is to accelerate the implementation process. So I've made this argument on multiple platforms, and sometimes people push back and they say, yeah, but you don't want to do that, because if you do it, then you encourage non-compliance.
Open
and then
the
it becomes floodgates. But I look at it differently. I actually think it's a lot easier to get people to comply after they have tasted it. And they are like, oh, this is good. I want to keep shipping. How do I now do the compliance, right? Rather than if they don't get to taste it and you do all the cross all the T's and dot all the I's and everything is, and then you say, hey, now you can trade because I'm done and I'm ready. People would only trade if they feel compelled, if they think that there's a reason to go through that whole process, to get certification and all of that, right? So my view is that you could establish, some sort of like cap and say, any product valued under, say, $10,000 US, can be traded under after without any rules of origin, paperwork. The only thing you need is to be able to show that a product was, has the, if it's made in Ghana, it's got a made in Ghana. Of course, anybody can put a made in Ghana stamp, right? But typically, you need a standards authority to certify the product,
right.
or the FDA to certify the product that is locally produced.
Yeah.
There are these proxy indicators for showing that at least the product was assembled locally, at the very least, or somehow produced locally. And I think it should be possible for us to have a limited period where we say everybody trade under after, under reduced tariffs, right? And after 2 years, we are going to get everybody to now start doing the compliance. We can try that. Perhaps it's a bit distractive of the process, but I personally feel that is one of the things we need. What do we have to lose? What are we trying to achieve?
Right, because
all we're trying to achieve is get our people trading amongst, each other. All we want to do is to compel small businesses to start looking for buyers in other African countries, to get them thinking Pan-African, when they think about markets, not just local or Europe, but they think Pan-African. Now, mind you, we're moving from a very low threshold of intra-Africa trade, 17% thereabout. We want to move it to 50%. It's going to take us a lot of effort. And if we're going to, have all these barriers, strict barriers, I think the process is going to be very, very slow. So I would say, get everybody into the market.
Yeah.
And then once they're in the market, you say, hey, if you want to keep taking advantage of the market, just do the paperwork. They are not going to withdraw.
Right.
They will do the paperwork in order to stay in the market.
So get them started and stimulate them to start looking for solutions to the barriers.
Solutions to the barriers, and then and all of that. So I hope that this is an idea that, will somehow...
Will fly.
It will fly.
Let's hope it will fly. So finally, Michael, despite all these challenges, do you still think that there are good reasons, to continue celebrating Africa Day?
I wish that we'd celebrate Africa Day more than once every year, to be honest, because I think we need more reminding than once a year. And even when Africa Day comes, a lot of people are aloof. A lot of Africans are not usually very aware that there's even something, like Africa Day. When it used to be a holiday in Ghana, most people, you would ask them, hey, what holiday it is? And most people wouldn't know what it was. In many ways, every day is an Africa Day. Whenever I hear Nigerian Afro beat music that I like, that's an Africa Day. Whenever I watch a movie from another African country, that's an Africa Day.
Whenever you eat chocolate.
Whenever I eat chocolate, that's an Africa Day. And as you know, as a consultant, I do a lot of work, in the Africa region. We've got a network of consultants in multiple African markets that we work with. We've got clients in different parts of the continent that we work with. That, for me, at a level of business owner, is what this whole Pan-Africanism thing, really means. And thanks to the internet, digital trade, and there's a protocol for digital trade and after. Africa has the most youthful population, in the world.
In the world, yes. Even overtaking Asia's, right?
Even overtaking Asia. Now, that gives us a very unique opportunity to use the internet, to use, digital platforms to accelerate, opportunities for, Africans, especially young Africans, to start finding opportunities in other parts of the continent. It's a very, very important opportunity that we need to curate and consciously encourage, especially young Africans, to think, continental, to think regional, to think Pan-African, because there are indeed opportunities. We're just talking about artisans from Togo, coming to Ghana, and getting work to do, whether they are tilers or carpenters or builders, right? In Ghana now, if you go to a lot of salons, a lot of the people who work in salons increasingly are Nigerians, who are coming together and, working in salons and, or restaurants or whatever it is. So I think that to make Africa Day meaningful, really is to let people appreciate the opportunities that exist in the continent, to take advantage of. We need to make sure that the African passport becomes a reality. So that if I am an African and I am traveling to another African country, I don't have to go and apply for a visa because I carry an African passport. It's just like the way we have the ECOWAS passport. You can travel within the Ghana card. We can travel within ECOWAS at least and live in another ECOWAS country for 90 days because you carry an ECOWAS passport. We should have that for all the continent. It will make it meaningful to the ordinary African to say that when I take my passport, it doesn't say Ghana passport, it says African Union passport. And I can travel to another African country carrying that. When I see my fellow Kenyan or my fellow Ethiopian or my fellow Malawian, we carry the same passport. There's that sense that we are one. It helps, right? So we need to do these things to make it practical, not just celebrate it once a year. We have to make every day an Africa Day by implementing these important policies. When I carry the African passport, every day is an Africa Day for me. Just as when I listen to that Nigerian music, every day is an African Day for me. So what you're doing is really fantastic. I think platforms like this that talk about Africa Day even after the day has passed, because that is what we're doing now, means that people like you are creating the awareness well beyond just that single day. And I really applaud you for that. And we need more broadcasters, we need more journalists, we need more media people doing this, right? So that, we can create the awareness. We can carry the conversation forward, and we can focus our minds and our businesses and our efforts, on solving all the challenges that need to be solved, in order for the continent to move forward. I am optimistic. I am not naive about all the challenges that we have. In fact, sometimes people think I'm cynical because I can be very, very skeptical about many of these regional initiatives, because when you get to the border at Aflao and you see all that you have to go through just to cross, it makes you question whether any of this is real.
Working.
Right? But we should never give up, because if we could get 47 countries to ratify the AFCFTA, we could get 47 countries to implement it. And we have to keep working at it. It is a work in progress.
Well, that is a great place to end. Make every day Africa Day. Thank you so much, Michael Kottoh, for coming into the studio and sharing these really useful insights with us. We look forward to having a further discussion with you someday.
Thank you.
So much.
Really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's flip the mood a bit now with a poem by Margaret Mamle-Koji. It's from her collection of poetry called A Poetic Stroll, and it's a poem of hope for Africa.
The plight of Africa. I was sitting, looking happily on my motherland, when suddenly I heard old Africa cry out saying, "Guardians of our land, come to our aid. Let Africa hearken to your voice and tread your chosen paths. For the land is changing fast, and not for the better, but heading straight to disaster." Then I heard voices from the unseen reply saying, "Do not lose hope, Africa, for what is yours can never be taken away forever." Then I got up to see what all the noise was about, to see what had really changed in Africa. And lo, when I looked, dear Mother Africa was at the crossroads. Old Africa was in a real dilemma. She was no more the Africa I used to know, the good old Africa where all was sanity, developing the productive life and the culture of the people. Give ear to me, you living in the dead. It all began with the coming of those people from beyond the horizon who came to plunder and to deceive. Among others, they came with their education, the gateway to civilization. Education that could only be acquired in the classroom, away from the watch of the elders. Our children were taken to the schoolrooms, and whatever they were taught there, only the gods can tell. But it is not to our good. For our children came back aliens to their own people and customs. They scorned their own culture, fit only for life in the cities, refusing to identify with the village. Their ways were different. Their clothing was different. Their talk was different. Their aspirations were different. Some even changed their names. Our traditional names gave way to strange ones. Yet, in the midst of all these changes, I noticed something strange. Our children traveled miles to join us celebrate the sprinkling of the stools and the festival of the New Year. Then I remembered the voices from beyond saying, "Do not lose hope, Africa, for what is yours can never be taken away forever." And I know it is the truth. Our history can never be destroyed. The roots go deep. You may cut down the tree, but the roots are always there in the soil, ready to shoot up with the coming of the new rains. Do not give up, Africa. You are the indispensable in a disturbed age. There is a vital role for you in history's upward march to stand in as a stalwart with values for the ages.
Thank you, Mamle-Koji, for that stirring rendition of your poem, The Plight of Africa. So that brings us to the end of this week's Your Ghana, My Ghana conversation about why we celebrate Africa Day. My guest today has been Michael Kottoh of Konfidants and Afro-Champions, and I am Dede Amanor-Wilks. Thank you for joining us on Graphic Online TV, and don't forget to subscribe on YouTube for more thought-provoking conversations. Look forward to seeing you next time.